Hey Deckers, we've got 6 more games to cover today in our performance roundups, kicking things off with Bodycam. This was released on the 7th of June to very mixed reviews and is supported on GeForceNOW, which is the footage you're actually seeing here, as this is how everybody expected it to look, and it does look incredibly good on that graphics front, to be completely honest. However, on the Steam Deck you are presented with a file explorer, and if you do dive into the binaries folder that pops up and then into Win64 and run the Bodycam Win64.exe file, this does actually run on the Steam Deck. However, I would definitely not call this playable. It runs absolutely hideously, it does not look good, although it is kind of playable. Dealing with 15 frames per second max, this does seem to be an Unreal Engine 5 issue if they haven't configured certain APIs and bits and pieces that we see this cap, and no matter what you do, doesn't fix this. And if you try and turn on frame generation, it just makes things twice as bad on the input latency and everything else. Otherwise, although it says 15 frames per second, I think it is a little bit higher, but it really doesn't look very good at all, especially when you have the option to be able to play that on GeForceNOW if you have decent internet or stream it elsewhere. As you can see, the clarity difference is just absolutely insane. Now, hopefully we'll see some improvements for Unreal 5 engine games coming in the future, so these will be more playable on the deck. But for now, you're going to have to find somewhere else to play. Next up, we have Men of War 2. Huge thanks for giving us a key to test this one out on the deck. This is also supported on GeForceNOW, but it has been running incredibly well on the Steam Deck. As you can see here, running at 40 to 50 frames per second for the most part. In heavy battles, it does dip down into the 30s. However, it is more than playable and a lot better than when it launched, as it was barely managing to hold 30 frames per second with awful graphics originally. However, now we can run at kind of medium graphics with SMAA on the anti-aliasing, medium texture detail, shadows on soft self-shadowing, anisotropic filtering at 4 times, with grass and parallax enabled, with depth of field and SSAO off. Other than that, you're going to be having a great time, although I was only using the kind of trackpad in the keyboard and mouse style. This would need a lot of remapping if you want to use this, as there is no controller support. However, I did find that I got by just using the mouse just fine. So if you do want to spend the time on that, you will need to make a mapping for yourself. Otherwise, mouse will get you through for the most part. Other than that, definitely playable, and hope to see this status updated. And of course, if you do want to play it on GeForceNOW at full graphics, you can, but I don't think it's needed for this one. Up next, we've got Ships at Sea. Again, huge thanks for giving us a key to test this one out. Also supported on GeForceNOW, and probably going to be where you're going to play this if you can. Although it does run on the Steam Deck around 30 to 40 frames per second, it doesn't look the greatest, and this one really will push the performance somewhat due to all of the sea effects, and especially when you're moving around on land, and probably one of the most challenging ways to fish that I've come across in a lot of games. More of a simulator than a game, I would say, for this one, of sailing and rowing in the sea to do fishing, and then obviously upgrade your boat with jobs and bits and pieces later. Overall though, it does work on the deck, and with these settings you are going to be able to get around 30 frames per second, but it is still an early access game, and there are a few issues with not only the controls, as controller support is only half implemented. So I have actually put a SDG Ships at Sea community mapping out there, and every time I've kind of tried to complete a mission in the second boat that you unlock, it seems to just crash into the dock and sink. So hopefully these issues can get sorted, but for the settings that I'm running on this one, also do make sure you put your autosave on every 5 or 10 minutes in case you do lose your boats. But also video wise, running this with the temporal upscaling balanced, with frame generation disabled and the frame limit set to 30 in game as well as on the deck itself. Pretty much everything on medium except view distance on near, reflections on low and shaders on low, and you're going to have a fairly decent time on this without it looking absolutely horrible. Word of warning, it does warn you in game as well, but don't bother trying to save during a mission, as the mission progress will not save. So if you've started a mission and you get yourself into trouble, then you will have to start that mission again if you want to either save or resave. However, if you do get yourself into trouble, at least it means it will save your boat. As you'll see here, I ended up sinking this one because it wouldn't leave the dock properly, and I lost all my mission progress. but if you manage to complete the mission and then go and wreck your boat, it's not so bad because you can save it before and after that mission is done. Let us know if you're going to be diving into ships at sea in the comments below. Next up we have Rack and Slay. Again, thanks for the key to test this one out. No official status yet on the deck, but it is running absolutely perfectly, and this will run at full speed on both the LCD and OLED with no issues, no major graphics options, just dive in and play. Pushing around 10 watts on the OLED, you're going to get a good 5 to 6 hours overall battery life, so a good 3 to 4 hours on the LCD. Now this is essentially a pool roguelite, so if you've been itching for your pool fix but also wanted a bit of roguelite action, then this is definitely the game for you. With lots of different abilities that you unlock and random extras, as well as the kind of strange different balls that you unlock and have to challenge, as well as not potting yourself as usual, which is very easy to do as a white ball. No issues running this one though, so check out the link in the description below to pick this one up for yourself. Sleeping Dogs Definitive Edition is up next, and I've been meaning to do this one for quite some time. Originally was marked as unsupported on the deck, but did recently get updated as playable because, well, it runs just fine. No issues at all with this one, and I did manage to get the settings to stay over 60 frames per second with it looking absolutely gorgeous on the OLED deck as well. And the combat with all of the other different abilities in this game, I can see why it's got people hooked. Pretty much GTA before its time, with much more to boot. I can definitely see why people were drawn to this one. It is also supported on GeForceNOW, but as you can see it runs perfectly fine on the deck, so no major reason to switch over on that one. Now you can just use the medium default and have no issues here, but if you do want to tweak it out a little bit more, then we can go with the high preset but knock things like the shadow resolution, filtering and ambient occlusion back down. No need for VSync as it's done on the deck, although I did find that it was better to have the motion blur off and world density left on high, and also having the anti-aliasing and shadow resolution back on high gave a really good balance of graphics and performance. This does knock you down into the 50 and 60 range occasionally, but for the most part sits at 60 to 70 on the frames per second front and looks absolutely phenomenal. And considering its age, you really wouldn't see that with the cutscenes, and especially when we're in things like the car chases and other bits and pieces that are thrown into this, you're going to have a whale of a time. Last up, we have the Rogue Prince of Persia. Huge thanks to GeForceNOW for giving me a key to test this one out. Marked as unsupported on the Steam Deck for some reason, but we'll get onto that in a minute. However, this was originally supposed to be all about GeForceNOW. Unfortunately though, for some reason, this runs really stuttery for me on GeForceNOW, even though it's got all the makings of a game that should run at 120 to 240 frames per second plus. Although the Steam Deck browser is still capped at 60 frames per second, for some reason it just wasn't a very enjoyable experience and had a huge amount of micro stutter as well as loading spikes, which I just don't understand. But not quite as bad as why this has been marked as unsupported, because if I actually run this on the Steam Deck directly and uncap the frame rate, there is nothing really in the way of display settings, so nothing to fiddle around with there, then this actually runs at a good 60 to 70 frames per second solid out of the box. Now, in some of the transition cutscenes, it does really stutter down to 5 or 10 frames per second while the level loads, but when we're actually in the levels, it's a pretty solid, stable experience with no stutter or micro stutter that I was seeing on GeForceNOW. So I really don't understand why this one has been marked as unsupported on the deck, unless it's got something to do with Steam saves or something else that I'm not quite seeing. It says in the unsupported notes that it can't hold a stable frame rate or decent graphic settings on the Steam Deck, but I see quite the opposite. Let us know in the comments below if you've had any troubles with this one, and also what other games you'll be looking at from this list. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.